was in a meeting once and had one of these gel pens I had on paper clip, and I was going, "What's this?" And that ink just flew out. People across the table, all over me. Mess. So, okay. Good morning and welcome to this edition of the Forum at All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Alex Westerfeld. I am the moderator this morning. We will be speaking about gun safety and gun sense legislation this morning. Our speaker will speak as usual for about 35 minutes. It'll be followed by a Q&A period for about 20 minutes. The program is live streamed on YouTube as I speak, and we monitor that. And so we welcome our online viewers, ask you to post your questions in the chat, and we ask them on your behalf. I'm going to ask Angela Ferguson if she will introduce our speaker this morning.
Sorry. Good morning. This is Stephenie Godfroy. She is with Moms Demand Action, the Kansas City, Missouri chapter, and I just think that she does amazing work. And thank you for being here on Mother's Day, and happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Stephenie Godfroy, and I'm the local group leader for our Kansas City metro area Moms Demand Action group. And you can see our full mouthful name there is Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. So we're going to talk about gun violence. We're going to talk about who we are and how we take action as an organization, and then some specific ways that you can get involved with our work. So, we always start our meetings with our intention. So this is our diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, and so our purpose, well, I should start at the top. We'll read it together. So, our intention is to foster a robust presence of diversity, equity, and inclusion of and for all individuals and groups choosing to join our efforts. Our purpose is to work together to decrease gun violence and increase public safety across our nation. In our meetings, events, and activities, we value diversity, we advance equity, we demonstrate inclusion, we are a community. We are gun violence survivors, including victims and witnesses, change makers, and advocates who come together in partnership to work toward a future that is free from gun violence. There we go. So, who are we? We are Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. We are a nonpartisan, does not mean apolitical, but nonpartisan grassroots movement working to reduce all forms of gun violence throughout the U.S. So we are part of Everytown. That is kind of our umbrella organization, along with Students Demand Action and the Everytown Survivor Network. So we're going to talk about all of those things here in a little bit. And collectively, we are the largest gun violence prevention organization in America with over 10 million supporters. So a little bit more about the basics of the work that we do. So we're a grassroots movement. That means that we are all volunteers, but working together towards a common goal. And while the data is alarming, and we're going to get into that a little bit, we are confident in our ability to reduce all gun violence. We have seen outcomes that show that our work is successful. We are strategic in our work, supporting evidence-based strategies to reduce gun violence in all its forms. We are a multifaceted organization that combats gun violence at the local, state, and national level, as well as working to try to advance cultural shifts around gun safety and supporting gun safety. So, especially here in Missouri, that's kind of a big one. But, so a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about our legislative work. We work to pass stronger gun laws that we know evidence backed will keep us safe or safer. And we know that gun violence is preventable. Uh, that we absolutely know that. And so, again, data, research, evidence backed, we know that we can prevent the loss of life. And then we work in our communities. We have lots of community partners and business partners to try to encourage that culture of responsible gun ownership. And we're committed to doing what it takes to keep our families safe. So this next one is just kind of words we use. There is a lot of language that gets thrown around this issue. And so just for Moms Demand Action, um, gun safety versus gun control. And part of the reason for that, gun control is a very loaded term. And it also doesn't really accurately reflect the work that Moms Demand Action is trying to do. We want safety. And then the next one has been brought to us by survivors, family members, things like that, that died by suicide versus committed suicide. There's just something in the language about that. And we know that gun violence disproportionately impacts communities of color. And we're going to talk about that again a little bit. But this is just something that we as an organization are aware of and that we want our supporters to also be aware of. Gun owners and the NRA are not the problem. It's true. They're really not. And we're going to talk about that too. But sobering, and the reason why so many of us are in this work, guns are the #1 killer of children and teens in the United States. Another one, permitless carry versus constitutional carry. That's you're gonna hear that a lot in places like Missouri. This idea of constitutional rights, or but really, what they mean is that just anyone and everyone should have unfettered access to firearms, and we do not believe that that is safe. And then background checks on all gun sales versus universal background checks. That just is very specific language, because a lot of people, I think, don't understand or realize that how easy it is to purchase a gun without a background check. So that's the gun show loophole, private sales, even inheritance. There are a number of ways to acquire a firearm without a background check. And we know that background checks have stopped hundreds of thousands of purchases of guns from people who could not pass a federal background check, which means they should not have firearms. So um, we're going to look at some of the facts. So as you join our movement, it's important to know the facts about gun violence. Everytown for Gun Safety, the organization which supports our grassroots work for Moms Demand Action, has a robust research team that helps ensure that we know the facts about gun violence, and that we are equipped to work strategically on evidence-based strategies to reduce gun violence. So, again, I said we were going to get into some alarming data and statistics, but the fact is that every day, more than 120 people are killed every single day from gun violence, and over 200 more are wounded. So in our Kansas City area hospitals, that is reflected as well, that 2/3 of victims that come into the hospital do not die, and they go on, and now they have to live with this trauma and the result of being shot. And so many of those tragedies never make the news. Again, right here in Kansas City, people are shot every day and you don't even hear about it. So, and especially when we're talking about gun deaths that are suicides and gun deaths in Black and brown communities, they don't make the news. But our goal is to end gun violence in all its forms in all communities. We know that many of you in this room may also have been impacted by gun violence or watching online. And we work to honor all victims and survivors of gun violence. And so I thank you for being here. Again. So this is the most recent data that we have from the CDC, which was in 2021, and uh, it's still true. It's still true that firearms are the leading cause of death for children and teens in the United States, and so we can see where all of that falls. Just gonna let that sit for a minute. Because I know for me, I'm a mom. You know, a lot of this is why we're here, and this is why we're doing this work. And then, of course, how our rates. Uh, yes, that line is startling and it is alarming. It should be. Um, just how we stack up against other wealthy nations. Yeah. So our homicide rate is 26 times higher than our next closest peer nation. Yep. So, and so then this is from Everytown Research that helps us with all the data, helps us put it all together so that we can then use it. Um, so if you look at gun law strength versus gun violence rate, per 100,000 residents, we can see pretty clear correlation there. States that lack basic gun safety laws have nearly 3 times the rate of gun deaths as states with the strongest gun safety laws. So we're going to talk about Missouri specifically. So there's a lot of information on this slide, but Everytown Research also, as they're putting out these findings about gun laws, there are, like, oh, look, these states are very strong. Oh, these states are progressing, they're moving forward. And then there are states that are national failures. So Missouri and Kansas, by the way, but Missouri is a national failure. So, as you can see, Missouri experiences one of the highest gun rates of so gun deaths, gun homicides, household firearm ownership. Missouri has the 7th highest rate of gun deaths in the nation. And Missouri not only has none of the foundational gun violence prevention laws, but in 2007, the state repealed an 80-year-old permit to purchase law that has led to an increase in the state's gun homicide rate by 27%. And in the last decade, uh, actually in the last 20 years, we have seen over a 58% increase in gun violence, which is well above the national average. And so, as lawmakers have been chipping away at our gun laws, the rate of gun violence has risen, and that absolutely is a correlation. So, only a few of the top 50 policies are in place for Missouri, and legislators have shown no momentum for passing gun laws, safety protections, despite the fact that consistently St. Louis and Kansas City are among the top US cities with the highest gun murder rates in the country. Consistently, like number 1 and number 3, that kind of thing, or always within the top 5 in the last 10 years. So, very sobering. Okay, and then we know that this disproportionately impacts communities of color. Excuse me. Okay, so the disproportionate impact of gun violence on Black Americans, non-Hispanic and not Latinx Black Americans make up 13% of the U.S. population, but 58% of the firearm homicide victims. This is not because Black Americans are inherently more prone to violence than others. Causes of this disproportionate impact are multifold and specific to the history of the country. We know that this is a systemic issue. Our country's history of discriminatory policies have left Black and Latinx people in segregated communities with high rates of poverty, unemployment, and incarceration. So, when concentrated, these factors are strong determinants of violent crime. This helps us understand why young boys and men of color living in impoverished, racially homogenous neighborhoods within cities are the leading victims of gun homicides and assaults. Okay. So, now we can talk about some recent victories. So these are statewide, but as you can see in the corner there, Missouri, we made a little victory. But in 2023, state legislatures across the country passed a record-breaking 130 gun safety policies. So we are seeing this in other states, but state lawmakers also blocked 95% of the gun lobby's agenda, including hundreds of attempts by the gun lobby to weaken gun laws. And so that's where we are in Missouri. Last year in 2023, we were able to block the bad gun bills. So we're playing defense, and we know that, but it's huge. And that really is a victory, being able to block legislation. And um, so we've got a demand a seat program for volunteers that want to run for office themselves. So it is a 2-year program or 2-year-old program, Demand a Seat, helped a record 162 Moms Demand Action volunteers run for office in 28 states in 2023. Also, we can see we're looking at funding. States allocated more than $693 million to gun violence prevention initiatives. And organizations across the country. And that includes Kansas City. So, and then we drove more than 230,000 comments in support of the ATF's rule to expand background checks. And recently, just last month, I don't know if you saw this, but that the Biden administration passed more extensions on those background checks, so that what we were saying before, background checks on all gun sales, expanding requirements for people who want to sell firearms, that they would be required to do a background check on the purchaser. So the ATF rule, this is from September of last year, the ATF announced a proposed rule to close the online and gun show loopholes, moving the nation closer to background checks on all gun sales. This rule would significantly reduce no background check gun sales, keep weapons out of the hands of dangerous people, and prevent tragedies. Our supporters drove more than 320 comments to the ATF, and the implementation of the rule was a monumental victory made possible by a decade of strong advocacy from Everytown and Moms Demand Action volunteers. And so now, even in April, we've seen that go even further. So the momentum is on our side. Okay, and then some more accomplishments. Secure gun storage, which we're going to talk about our Be Smart program again in a little bit, but secure gun storage. More than 10 million students nationwide now attend schools with secure firearm storage awareness policies. And so my school district is one of those where my kids go to school. We had a volunteer speak at the school board meeting and present this information, how secure storage saves lives. And so now my district sends, as part of all their back to school stuff, all families in the district get an email about secure storage with all the data and information about that, which is great. Okay, and so then last year also, in 2023, the Biden-Harris administration launched the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention with 2 gun violence survivors, one a partner and one a former Everytown staffer at the helm. And then our partners, the Everytown Community Safety Fund, launched in 2019, is the largest national initiative solely dedicated to fueling the life-saving work of city violence intervention organizations and in cities nationwide. So we are committed to distributing $25 million through 2026 to provide grantee organizations. So again, even in Kansas City, Aim for Peace was one of our grantees. And since the fund's launch, we have granted over 11 million in support of 119 CVI organizations, implementing promising strategies like street outreach, hospital-based violence interventions, and youth development and counseling in more than 68 American cities. And so all of those, again, locally, are programs that have been supported here in Kansas City. Okay. So this is a phrase that we use a lot, honor with action. And so we're going to talk about that we honor the lives of victims of gun violence and survivors. And we honor them with our action. So these are all the ways that we can take action. So gun laws, we work at the local, state, and federal level to pass and enforce gun laws that will save the most lives. And then secure gun storage. We have an education program called Be Smart, and that's an acronym, and I promise there's a slide about that. But it opens the dialogue for adults, parents, caregivers, and others to discuss the secure storage of firearms. So that SMART is an acronym. And again, we'll have a slide. I promise. We'll come back to it. So starting in 2019, we leveled up our work to support local allies around strategies that reduce homicides. This includes partnership with gun violence interrupters and work around comprehensive community gun violence prevention. It is a relatively newer area for us, addressing city gun violence, but one that we are actively engaged in at the grassroots and organizational level. We also work to identify, support, and elect gun sense candidates. So we launched a gun sense candidate program starting in 2018 for candidates who are willing to make gun safety a campaign priority. And so the way that they can earn this distinction, there's a survey that goes out, and then we also have volunteers that will reach out and monitor campaigns, and then especially once they are in office, also keeping tabs. But in 2024, it is incredibly important that we will work not only to support gun sense candidates at the top of the ballot, like President Joe Biden, who has been endorsed by Everytown, but also gun sense candidates at the state and local level. And so we have a website for that. Again, we're going to come back to that. So if you want to find your gun sense candidate, I'm going to tell you how you can do that. We also work to create awareness. We do this through some of our various programs, like Be Smart, which I mentioned earlier, Wear Orange, which is coming up. So we're going to talk about that too. But that is our largest visibility event of the year. It's held in June. Also, Disarm Hate, a campaign that centers around the fact that when hatred is armed, it can be deadly. The One Thing You Can Do program, which educates the public about extreme risk protection orders and how they can help families when someone is in crisis. And the Everytown Survivor Network, which is a community of gun violence survivors, many of whom have become advocates for change. Okay. And so then in Missouri. So this is a picture from our recent Advocacy Day. And Advocacy Day is something that happens once a year during the legislative session. Volunteers all head down to Jeff City, and we split up into groups, and then we go and we meet with our lawmakers, and we have a list of bills that we either oppose or support, and we really try to meet with as many lawmakers as possible just to talk about what we do and why it matters, and specifically the impact that we believe that those bills could have on Missourians. And so then why we would like you to either support or oppose. But so that was the group from this year. Okay. Now, do you have to be a mom to demand action? No, of course not. Moms Demand Action was founded around the concept of motherhood. It was founded by a mom, and the protection of our nation's children. But we know that it is going to take all of us to make the change necessary to end gun violence in America. So, this work requires the commitment of entire communities. So, your parenthood status is irrelevant here. We are all stakeholders in this work because it affects all of us. So, it will take all of us. The only thing that matters is your commitment to a shared understanding of the problem and how to fix it. Okay. So now we're getting it into some of our national campaigns. We have a number of ways to get involved right away and support national campaigns and how these work locally. So GSAN, the Gun Sense Action Network, is our national phone banking team. Be Smart is our public education campaign. You can learn more, get training, start sharing that right away. And then, like I said, extreme risk, that one thing you can do, helps prevent shootings and is directly linked to preventing suicide by gun, which is the most lethal method. And so far, the only states that have passed red flag laws are California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Washington, D.C., Florida, Hawaii, Indiana, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. But they have seen a decrease in gun deaths. So again, we see the correlation. Stronger gun laws, more protections, less gun violence. And then fundraising. We have a fundraising page, and I've got a little flyer out there for that. And Gun Sense Voter. So again, you can be a Gun Sense voter. There we go. So if you want to join our volunteer outreach team, this is a way that you can do that. The Gun Sense Action Network is split up into two different teams. There's a volunteer outreach team that makes welcome calls to anyone who has signed up for Moms Demand Action. They also make calls for states that need a little extra help with recruiting folks for certain types of events. And then the voter outreach team, it's going to be a big one this year, makes elections calls to help voters come up with a plan to vote, help elect gun sense candidates, and help constituents be directly connected to their legislator. So GSAN has a consistent national training, and you can volunteer from home and just make calls in your PJs. You can do it all from home. But so you can text volunteer to 64433. Okay. Be smart. So the Be Smart campaign is near and dear to my heart. I love it. It was launched in 2015 to promote responsible gun ownership in order to reduce child gun deaths. So whether you're a gun owner or you know someone who owns a gun, there is a role for everyone in the conversation around secure gun storage. So Be Smart is a framework that parents, caretakers, and community leaders can follow to help keep their community safe. Ultimately, you can help prevent kids from accessing firearms by storing them securely and encouraging others to do the same because children deserve to feel safe no matter where they are. And so, again, I said that it was an acronym. So now that we can see what that is. So the S stands for securing guns in your home and vehicles. And again, I don't know if you guys have been monitoring the news lately, but nationwide, and again, here in Kansas City, we have seen a pretty drastic increase of guns being stolen from cars, from unlocked vehicles. So, um, so not just in your home, but securing guns in your home and vehicles. And securing guns in your home, what that looks like is locked. The firearm is locked ammunition locked and stored separately. And that is a recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So that is why we promote that. M, modeling responsible behavior around guns. So if you are a gun owner, that is your responsibility. A, this was a big one for me as a parent that I had not really thought of before, asking about the presence of guns in other people's homes. So when my kids go for play dates or sleepovers, even if it's a relative, you need to know, do you own firearms? And if so, how are they secured? Oh, we leave it in the nightstand drawer. Oh, maybe, maybe not. Oh, I have a biometric safe and I'm the only one that can access it. Great. R is recognizing the role of guns in suicide. And so the reason that we say that is, again, firearms are the most lethal means. And what the data tells us is that if someone were to attempt suicide with a firearm, 90% of those are going to be successful. It is the most lethal means. However, if an attempt is made by any other means, 90% of those people survive. And then on top of that, most people do not go on to attempt again. So if they survive, they use any other means, ultimately they survive. So that's, again, sobering. But when we talk about extreme risk and we talk about secure storage, we are absolutely talking about suicide prevention. And then the T is telling your peers to be smart. So you just spread the word. Excuse me. Okay, so our Gun Sense voter campaign. This is part of Everytown for Gun Safety for the Action Fund and the Everytown for Gun Safety Victory Fund, along with the volunteer grassroots network Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action. So this is organized to elect candidates who support common sense gun safety laws at every level of government. So when the program started, it started out just at the federal level, but then as the years have gone by, we've moved down to state level and then even local. So like mayoral elections, city council elections, school board elections. So if like Be Smart is something that you want your school district to be involved with, that's where that comes in. But so electing candidates who support stronger gun safety laws is critical to creating a future free from gun violence. And your vote makes a difference. And so I put a couple of QR codes here. So in Missouri, if you would like to join our elections team, you can do that with that link. Or do you know a gun sense candidate running for a local office or a state level office? You can let us know. And I did this recently with the person who was running for my district. I, you know, sent off that email. Okay. And so then the Everytown Survivor Network is another one of our nationwide community initiatives. And it is a community of survivors working together to end gun violence. The Survivor Network amplifies the power of diverse survivor experiences to put a human face to our nation's gun violence crisis. We connect survivors to build community, offer trauma-informed programs and trainings, and provide information on and referrals to direct services. The Everytown Survivor Network, along with Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action, is part of Everytown for Gun Safety. And so if you are a survivor, and the way that we define survivor, this is important, not just if you yourself have been shot or threatened with a gun, but if you have lost someone close to you, so a loved one to gun violence, you carry that wound. You are a survivor. So there are resources available here. You can text survivor to 64433, and you can visit momentsthatsurvive.org. You can share your own story, read other people's stories, share those stories, amplify the message. Okay, and then students demand action. Our youth advocates have been part of our grassroots work for years. And so our youth advocacy was launched Students Demand Action. It is a national initiative created by and for teens and young adults to channel the energy and passion of high school and college age students into the fight against gun violence. Students Demand Action volunteers work within their schools and communities to educate their peers, register voters, and demand common sense solutions to this national crisis. So if you know a student age 14 or older, so we're looking at high school on up, who is interested in joining Students Demand Action or starting their own group, you can have them text student to 64433. So that 64433 is our kind of catch-all text line, but depending on what you text there is how you'll get connected. Um, yes, and there's also Summer Leadership Academy. Okay. So wear orange. This is our next big thing that is coming up the first weekend in June. So why orange? On January 21st, 2013, Hadiah Pendleton marched in President Obama's second inaugural parade. 1 week later, Hadiah was shot and killed on a playground in Chicago. Soon after this tragedy, Hadiah's friends commemorated her life by wearing orange, the color that hunters wear in the woods to protect themselves and others. Wear orange is now observed every June. Thousands of people wear the color orange to honor Hadiah, and more than 43,000 Americans that are killed with guns, and approximately 76,000 more who are shot and wounded every year. So our Wear Orange event will be taking place. So the weekend, again, is June 7th through 9th. And you can join us in honoring survivors and building community with those working to end gun violence. And our event will be, we're combining with the Kansas Moms this year. So that's why we're going to be meeting, you'll notice, in Prairie Village, Kansas, not in Missouri, but that's okay. And so it's going to be a rally with speakers and then a walk. And you don't have to bring anything, just wear orange. Okay. And so then we want to make sure that your time and energy are used as efficiently and effectively as possible as we work to end gun violence. So we're talking about saving lives. But so we want to know, how would you like to get involved? Would you like to get involved? Of course you would. So you can text commit to 64433. And these are all the different teams that we have. So membership, legislative advocacy. And again, that's a big one, especially here in Missouri. But event support, membership building, community outreach and education, data and tech tools. Again, all of that data that we use to drive our movement. Somebody has to do that. And then, of course, students demand action. Maybe you want to be a liaison to one of our students demand action groups. So showing up is the first step, and how you stay involved is important. We want you to find work that is meaningful, that also supports our local, state, and national priorities, all 100% focused on saving lives. So here are some ways that you can continue to take action and get involved. And then we have an app. So the Demand Action app, you can find it in Google or Apple stores. And this is a really great way to have just quick access to timely calls to action. When you pull it up, there's an action tab right at the top that tells you either a national action that you can take or local, that kind of thing. And you'll have quick access to information about events. You can even use it to like message and chat and just news. So yeah. So like these are events and you can RSVP right in the app. Text app to 64433. Okay. And so then here's how you can act today. Another one. So after the parade shooting. Um, Many House Democrats proposed this House Joint Resolution 135. This would repeal preemption right now in Missouri. Local municipalities are prohibited from enacting any sort of legislation locally around guns. And so this would repeal that preemption. So places like Kansas City and St. Louis can institute our own policies that we know will work to prevent gun violence. And so you can take digital action by scanning that code um, to email the Senate and House and urge them to support this legislation. If you already know, like maybe you're one of those people like, oh, I've got their email address saved already, do it. Send that email. Um, the number is HJR 135. And we are just at the very, very end of the legislative session. This is the last week. Uh, so, really, at this point, it's just going on record that this is something that we want and that this should be supported. And it's the kind of thing that could come up as perhaps a ballot initiative. If it doesn't get any traction in the House, um, we could see it in the future as a ballot initiative. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to pause just for a minute for some housekeeping tasks. Take up a offering to support the work of the forum, so pop your money in that basket as it comes by, and I have some here too, George. I mentioned a couple weeks ago we've raised over $3,500 this year by our supporters, so appreciate everybody's support. Thanks very much. And then by way of reminders, this presentation is available on our website at allsoulskc.org in case you have friends or people you know who would be interested in this topic. There are a lot of resources, especially towards the end of this, that you could get to people. So I encourage you to forward the link to this presentation to them. And also it's available on KKFI 9 days following today's presentation. And then finally, next week, our presentation title is Immigration, Labor, and the 2024 Election. We're going to have two presenters, Itzel Vargas, who is a community organizer with advocates for immigration rights and reconciliation. We also will have Judy Ansell. She's a labor rights educator and human rights advocate. She heads the Cross Border Network. So I think that'll be a really interesting presentation. I would encourage people to come. Again, if you know people who are interested in that topic, encourage them to show up or join us online. Okay. So we will now take care of Q&A. Oh, and I should mention afterwards that Stephenie will be available to continue discussion in the library with us. So, but if you have questions, please go to the side, speak directly into the microphone so that people can hear you.
Thank you. That was very well done.
Thank you.
What is the status of, to me, one of the really no-brainer actions that should be taken about weapons is for military-style automatic, like AR-15s and so on, which make no sense whatsoever to be in the hands of citizens. In fact, at one time, 20 years ago, there was some federal legislation prohibiting that. So what is the status of the military style weapons now in the country and locally?
Yes. Well, I will say locally, there are practically no restrictions around it. But federally, you can text Fed up to 64433 to ask your federal legislators to support the assault weapons ban. Because, as you said, when that ban was in place, we saw a decrease of violence. And then, of course, since, again, Since the repeal, we've seen a rise. And just personally, I agree with you. Uh, I don't think that military style weapons have place in our streets. I don't want to live in a war zone. So, yes, you can take action and ask your federal legislators to reinstate the assault weapons ban.
I have heard numerous times that 78% of people in the United States support reasonable gun laws. Yet, this seems to have no effect on the majority of our legislators. Could you enlighten us a bit?
That is a really tough one. I mean, the thing is, we know that we are in the majority, right? But how do we get that to translate to actual change in our laws? And so I will just say at the state level, we know, my opinion, we are being dominated by extremists. And so even my lawmaker, who is a Republican and who is a moderate, has told me to my face that I have to support all of this other legislation that comes through so that they won't blackball me when I want to put legislation through. And so he ends up voting party line every single time, even in extreme measures like the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which last year was declared unconstitutional. And so, really, using your voice to contact your legislators obviously is a way to at least make yourself heard. But again, electing gun sense candidates is really the way that we are going to make this change. Electing candidates who will make um, gun safety legislation a priority. That's how we make the change. So it's an election year. There's lots of work that can be done. Hmm.
This will be a controversial question.
Okay.
Uh,
I'll try.
what kind of research? I was impressed that I'll actually contribute to every day or every town that they have this research thing. To what extent have they looked into the issue that since by far most of this gun violence and impact are in poor inner city areas? To what extent the opposition to doing anything about it is really a form of prejudice against these people, primarily of color?
Mhm.
You don't have to answer that. Well, just what research is being done?
Into like the opposition, or let me make sure I understand your question. So the website is Everytown Research, and that is where all the data lives. And then there's also everystat.com that you can find information about each state. Okay, go on.
Well, think of the psychology or the sociology of this phenomena,
Hmm.
where the impact is so much greater on people of color in inner city,
Hmm.
low income areas. But most of the opposition to doing anything about it are people in the upper rural, primarily rural, but upper class areas. So that this is really a sociological problem of really great import. So, what kind of
Hmm.
research are they doing? Polling, interviewing, whatever, to try to pin this down because it could become part of
Hmm.
the story that Mom Demand Actions tell.
Yeah. So again, the Everytown research team, yes, all of that data is out there, and that is why initiatives like that Community Action Fund and those grantee programs were initiated. So you can donate to the Everytown Action Fund and to support those community gun violence intervention programs. Everytown has done that research, and they know that there is a lack of support and funding for a lot of these communities that experience a heightened level of gun violence. And so, yes, the research is there and the data is there. And the goal to put money and resources is there. That initiative is there. Um, and just an illustration that I use just personally, like when you think of gun violence, it is a multifaceted, multi-cause problem. And so if you think of it like a tree, oh look, there's some trees here. The larger the tree, the larger the root system, right? And so if we can acknowledge that gun violence is a large problem, it has a large extended root system. So no one thing is going to solve it. No one person or even one group, as large as Moms Demand Action is, again, we need partners. We need community partners, other organizations that are going to invest in our communities. And again, part of that is also through electing gun sense candidates who will agree to support those community intervention programs. And so, just personally, as a volunteer, wherever like you pick out a route, you pick out a cause, and that's your passion, go for it. Do it because it's all connected and it all makes a difference.
So that is leads right into my question.
Okay.
In the past, All Souls has been part of grandparents for gun safety. Are you a
Yes.
partner with them, or are they part of the
Yes.
same organization?
So they are one of our community partners. We would consider them. Um, so again, like Grandparents for Gun Safety, Casey Mothers in Charge, Aim for Peace, Ad Hoc Group Against Crime. These are all community partners. So again, the goal is gun violence prevention. And so, and Lives on the Line is a newer one, a newer group that we're connected with. So yes, wherever you feel like you can fit in and take a little bit of action, however much time you have to dedicate to it, go for it because it's all connected and it all helps.
One other
So,
quick
yeah.
question. You said the Biden administration had recently established an office for gun safety.
So, yes, in 2023, the first ever Office of Gun Violence Prevention.
Does the city of Kansas City, Missouri have something similar or?
Yes. So Kansas City is working with what they call the Kansas City Blueprint. And so part of that is KC 360. It's modeled off of Omaha 360. But the idea, again, because so many root causes, offering that wraparound intervention and wraparound services to address many different causes of violence in our communities. And so you can find out more about the Casey Blueprint and the work that our local administration is doing just by going to their website. But yes, there are local initiatives that are working to address this problem.
I want to challenge a couple things, but I'm doing it politely and simply, right? So you said in the beginning, gun owners and NRA members are not the problem, okay? And I have some concern that I think other people have shared, especially who may be on the other side, if there's really a side on these issues. There's a difference between gun violence and gun ownership, right? So I'm thinking when we look at the correlations between that you showed for the high income countries and gun violence, we could do that in the US for rural and urban. We might find higher rates of gun ownership in rural areas, would be my guess. I don't know if that's true, but that might be my guess. And
It depends,
my
but
guess you might also find lower rates of gun violence in those areas. So can, because I would assume this has come up before, the issue of conflating gun violence with gun ownership. So
Mhm.
could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so like I said, gun owners are not the problem. Again, that's one of the cultural shifts towards gun safety and responsible gun ownership. Uh, and so I don't know what our current rate of gun ownership is in the metro versus other parts of the state. Um, what we do see is that rates of gun homicide are higher in rural communities, or sorry, gun homicide are higher in urban communities. Gun suicide is higher in rural communities. And again, there are a lot of reasons for that. And again, lack of resources. So, if we're talking about access to mental health, if we're talking about extreme risk protection, um, so secure storage, that's why that's such a big deal, extreme risk protection, and responsible gun ownership. So promoting that because we do have the Second Amendment and we work within the Second Amendment, and we can do that without guns everywhere and in the hands of people who we know that should not have them. Mm, Is that okay?
Well, responsible gun ownership, I believe, is closer than we like to admit. In Canada, there are more guns per capita than in the United States. Yeah. Well, there's only 40 million people in Canada. So
I didn't know.
the one much smaller population, but they have laws with about uh, background checks, and they have and, ownership of a revolver or pistol or what is outside of a gun club is practically unknown.
Mhm.
They're very they stand it. Why can't we take this example and use it?
Yes. I know. I know. Well, and when we talk about this data, we have seen other countries that have far more effective laws around gun violence. And again, I'm gonna keep going back to electing gun sense candidates because really, 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 that is how we change the laws in our country, and that really is a big one. But then, you know, also changing this understanding around maybe uh, what is reasonable when it comes to gun laws. Like, I know a lot of people were very surprised to learn after the Kansas City parade shooting that there are no restrictions on minors openly carrying firearms in Missouri, like openly carrying rifles, military style weapons. Minors, children, like there's no age limit, nothing. And I know a lot of people were very surprised to learn that. Maybe you're surprised to learn that right now, but that is true. Um, in my opinion, that is something that could be changed. That is something that maybe is not reasonable and that we can put some more restrictions around that for the sake of a safer society, a safer community.
Thank you. It's a very good presentation. I have one observation. You meant it's been talked about the NRA not being a problem. It is a problem. Your example of your legislator not wanting to go against the tide is a perfect example of that. It's follow the money.
Yes. Yes. No, and money is a huge thing. Like, um, there are a number of repeals that can be made to hold gun manufacturers accountable. There are very few avenues for that right now, but uh, being able to hold gun manufacturers accountable for their product causing harm, that's definitely something. But again, because money, money. But the NRA is imploding on itself. Um, so we're not Yes. Still a powerful organization just in what they have been able to do around the culture of gun ownership, and that is what we're pushing back against. Um, but again, they're kind of taking care of themselves, and we don't necessarily need to worry about the NRA so much as um, changing the culture and the way that we view gun ownership and gun safety.
Um, Along the lines of that previous comment, the and comparing it to the issue of abortion in the United States, um, do you see the possibility that people who've been formerly pro-gun are against the legislation, raising their wet finger and realizing that your movement and people like you are going to essentially put them out of office? Do you see the potential for there to be cynically again suddenly making a change in your direction?
I I mean, I would love to see it. um, yeah. And again, like politically, um, just not that long ago, um, we kind of thought of gun violence as a third rail issue. People weren't really talking about it. Candidates for office weren't really talking about it, and that has definitely changed. And again, in the last year, we've seen um, Biden and Harris administration. They ran on this platform. That gun violence prevention was a central part of their goals, their platform, and then creating this Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Um, so again, you said earlier that so many people, the majority of Americans, actually support, you know, what we would refer to as these common sense laws, like background checks for all gun sales. And so, again, as you contact your legislature and either at the state or the federal level, keep making those calls, keep making your voice heard. I would love to see more politicians change their tune on this issue.
Okay. Thank you, Stephenie. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue discussion in the library for those who are interested. Thanks again.